In the beginning, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat.
No, Odysseus, let him rack his brains with you and the other captains how to fight guilty.
Impossible. Trust me.
No one to weep for me, my friends. No wedding song.
Amo verumque cano, Troiae qui primus laboris Italiam
Dante ha fatto il pieno e per gli altri è rimasto ben poco, which means that Dante filled up.
I was the more deceived.
Confess that you were very bad to hurt my feelings.
Cried Candide, I'm through.
Enough. Who are you then?
Part of that force which would do evil evermore, and yet
She was eating a maraschino ice at that precise moment.
There is no
When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous dung beetle.
Hi again. Welcome to, where are we? Lesson 6 in our Living Literature series. And today we are going to continue our discussion of Sophocles and Greek drama. This time we're going to shift gears a bit and move to a play which has considerable, I think, modern import. That is Sophocles' play Antigone, which looks at the struggle between individual conscience and the law of the state. Very difficult issue, I think, an issue that we in democracies wrestle with on an almost daily basis. Dramatizing again, I think, that movement from the tribe to the city, from the tribe to the polis, where we now have to get along with one another. You remember that was not a significant motivation for Achilles. Getting along with his fellows was not high on his list. But if we're going to live in cities, if we're going to live together, we've got to get along. And sometimes loyalties can be conflicted. Sometimes our loyalty to the state is conflicted by our loyalty to either our religion or to our individual conscience. And this play dramatizes this about as well as any in our culture. Let's do our usual format here, and we'll open up to questions. Questions about this play before I start asking some.
You suggested the duality here, the state and the individual, but there's a trinity, really, because the gods do enter into Antigone's action.
Yeah, absolutely true, yes. One struggle in the play is which law you are to follow. Are you to follow the law of religion, follow the traditional law, or are you to follow the law of the polis? And this is a tough one.
We were talking about the women's situation at the time, and wasn't that very brave of Antigone to stand up to men?
Sure was.
They had such a low status.
Ismene in the opening scene makes that quite clear, doesn't she? That even though she might agree with Antigone's stance, she realizes that women are weaker than men, and she is conditioned to take a subservient role to the men in the play, and therefore is not willing to share Antigone's destiny. You'll also notice, too, that running throughout the play is a man-woman verbal struggle, if you will. Creon simply will not be ruled by a woman. He simply will not be told to do by a woman. If you go back and, if you haven't noticed this on your first reading, go back on a second reading and see how many times this man-woman struggle is articulated. Clearly, Creon sees himself as a kind of representative male who is certainly not going to take directions from someone lesser than himself. And we all know that women are lesser than men.
But doesn't she have their father's statue? I think it came through. I see a lot of Oedipus.
Yes, well, there's a lot of reference to Oedipus, isn't there? There's a lot of reference to the old curse, that notion that, what would we call it today? That biology is destiny? Is that the, that notion that things pass on from generation to generation, and sometimes those things that pass are not terribly pleasant.
There is a line that my eye just fell on. My book just happens to be open here, where the leader of the group says, "Like father, like daughter."
Yeah.
Passionate, wild.
Yeah.
She hasn't learned to bend before adversity.
Yes, indeed.
She is compared favorably to her father.
Yes, it's very similar to Oedipus, that very strong will, that sense of action, that sense of following through on one's integrity to the end, no matter what the cost.
But that's because she spent all that time with Oedipus in his travels, or in his exile. She had to become independent. She had to protect him. She developed those qualities which he had lost along with his blindness.
Yeah,
so
I think that's what
her.
Susan's saying. She's very much her father's daughter. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And she did go. Ismene didn't.
Yeah, yeah.
And then she did return to her home and resume that life after her father died.
Yeah.
She made choices.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. And the choices were always family-oriented. Do you notice that? That's an important point that needs to be made in this play, that sometimes the state demands that you do things that run contrary to your notion of the larger demand of the family. Antigone's loyalty is to the family, not to the state. Yeah. Yes.
Then the shame of Oedipus, the so-called shame, whatever, is wiped out then after his death, and his children do not carry on his guilt or shame?
I believe that's true, yes. Indeed, Sophocles will later write a play called Oedipus at Colonus. Oedipus, as we talked in our last class about how noble Oedipus is at the end, and indeed how admirable. There's almost something awesome, isn't there, about the character of Oedipus. He's awe-inspiring. Even when he knows it's going to rebound very badly on him, he pursues it to the end. And there's something noble about that. And after writing the Oedipus Tyrannus, Sophocles, the play had quite an effect on the Athenian audience. And they grew to admire Oedipus so much that poor old Sophocles had to write a play in which Oedipus was ultimately rewarded. And he writes Oedipus at Colonus, where Oedipus is brought up into the heavens and becomes almost a favorite of the gods. Yeah, it is. It's very interesting, the power that Oedipus Tyrannus had. I might also tell you that it did not win first place. You know, the play is lost that won first place, but it must have been a doozy. It's too bad we lost it.
I was wondering, like Sophocles and the others, they write so beautifully. What was their educational background?
That's very interesting. Yeah, there was some formal education, but it was, there was some formal education, but it was not extensive.
So, I mean, if we were doing that now, we look at all the education we have.
Yeah. Look, we can ask this one about everybody we read this term. It's that great conundrum of tradition and the individual talent. How indeed do you explain a period in history like 5th century BC Athens where you get playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides? It's just woo! And how do you explain the Elizabethan England and the explosion of plays then? You know, it's very difficult to explain. How do you explain a Shakespeare, that sort of thing?
They had to have some basis to really put it together so well.
Yeah, well, they
just
studied
the imagination.
You all know about the quadrivium and the trivium and things like that. They studied and
the sophists went around teaching the young.
That's correct. They sure did. Yep. Yep. And then there was a lot of exchange in the agora, in the marketplace. It was a very heady time, I think, is the best way to describe it.
Period of intellectual freedom, would you say?
Oh, definitely. Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely. Great questioning. It's always a period. My own theory is that you find this at periods where the old ways are giving over, the new ways have yet to be born, and you're in a period of transition where most of the population wants to look back and hunker down because they're afraid of what's coming forward. You know, they're afraid of the future. And then there are those others that say looking back is not going to prepare you for looking ahead. They also coincide, interestingly enough, with periods of religious revival. If you think about this, it's really quite interesting. You've got, what shall we choose? 5th century BC Athens, to be sure. The agricultural revolution, let's think of the 13th century, the 12th and 13th century, which was a great age of religious revival. And of course, what's happening is the old world is dying, the new world is yet to be born, and we hunker down. See it again with the Industrial Revolution. The 18th century was a great age of evangelism. Evangelism, is that the word I want? What is that word? Yeah, in the West, because it was undergoing such change. The old way was dying, the new way was to be born. And some will argue that that's exactly what is going on since about the 50s in Western culture now. We're moving through what Alvin Toffler calls the third wave, and we're hunkering down. You see a great religious revival and a great revival in traditional religion, and indeed in tradition, period, because we're so afraid of what's coming. It's natural to want to conserve, to be conservative.
Shaking, and that third wave is a shaking and getting rid of the hypocrites and cleaning out the religious places, churches, and
we'll see, won't we?
Didn't Creon feel doubly betrayed by Antigone because she was a family member, and there's the suggestion that if he can't rule his family, can he rule the state?
Yeah, he has a lot of trouble with his family, doesn't he? Yeah, he really does. Obviously, the most painful for him, I think, maybe not obviously, and maybe you'll disagree with me, is the very problematic relationship he has with his son. It's really quite touching in a way, isn't it? And it plays out that wonderful father-son stuff, you know, mother-daughter stuff that is just a universal. That struggle, and again, Creon's sense of propriety. Remember the decorum and the sense of propriety he showed in the Oedipus, when he comes back from the Delphic Oracle and says, "You really don't want me to tell you this in front of all these people, do you?" You know, that heightened sense of decorum. You see it again, don't you, in the Antigone? Am I to be lectured to by a boy? It's unseemly. It's undecorous, you know? Am I to take direction from a woman? It's unseemly, you know? Am I to listen to the voice of the people? It's unseemly. I am the king. The city is mine. And the chorus says to him, "You'd rule a desert well." Ooh, boy, a devastating line, isn't it?
I wondered,
just a devastating
line. Is
the
chorus somewhat like the conscience?
It can be. The chorus can be quite complicated. Frequently, the chorus is the audience's representative on the stage, and it guides your response to the action. It kind of gives you a clue on how you're to respond. What I find very interesting about the chorus in Antigone is that it is only very late in the play that it wins over to Antigone's side. There is a tendency, I think, with this play to see it as melodrama rather than as tragedy. There's a tendency for moderns to see Antigone is right and Creon is wrong. Creon is the villain, right? And Antigone is the hero. But that's not, that falsifies the play. It is quite clear that the chorus sides with Creon through much of this play, as indeed the original audience would probably side with Creon through much of this play. The play is quite striking. Remember, we talked last time about Oedipus granting favors at the beginning of the play and begging favors at the end of the play. We get a similar thing in Antigone. It's quite stark. At the beginning of the play, Antigone is all alone. Everyone's against her. And then slowly through the course of the play, people start moving over to her side. Creon finally does it, but alas, too late.
Didn't the chorus at one time, probably toward the end of the play, say that you're going to have a hard time, Creon, because everyone sympathizes with her. After all, it is her brother, and who wants to leave your own kin above ground to be eaten by the vultures? And they warned him that that people would side with her. Yeah. And so they did turn toward her side.
Everybody slowly moved over, to be sure. Yeah.
But their whole ethical situation was to honor the dead, because if you remember from Homer, that took. I said, "Wait a minute, time out. We'll bury our dead.
Yeah, sure.
Nobody will touch anybody else. You
even the enemy.
But to bury them so they would have a future life."
Yeah. But what are you going to? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that Creon saying he may not be buried is about as terrible a thing as can happen.
Mm-hmm. But let's also, do we have sympathy for Creon here? I mean,
no, I think he's wrong.
But the man is a traitor.
Yes, he's a traitor.
And let's remember that there has been a period here of revolution, that Polynices has led the Argives against the city. And you all know what happens. You remember from Homer, don't you, what happens when the city falls?
Yeah.
I mean, the men are killed, the women are sold into slavery, and the children are sold into slavery. It's not pretty. Mm-hmm. Here is a guy trying to consolidate some stability and some power. Are you guys such romantic saps that you want to suggest to me that both the good and the bad deserve equal treatment? Polynices is the bad guy.
But Antigone has a line that said, death is equal. There's equanimity in death. Antigone
Even
has that
traitors
line.
should be buried.
Oh, you guys, you're so romantic. Come on, doesn't he have to make an object lesson here? Creon's in a tough position. Let's have some sympathy for Creon here. He's in a tough position.
Now he's like Oedipus, making these decisions. He's got to do right, and the right is going to hurt him. And
I thought somebody was going to say he's like Agamemnon. He makes a decision. He's got, were you? Yeah, he's got to stick to it.
Yes, and
There's a kind of stubbornness to Creon.
Yes, but they do recapitulate at the end.
That's
I mean,
right.
there is a certain, they give up this overweening pride, and so and they get that humanity.
Yeah.
My point when I said what I said was, this is the reason that the people swung back to her, was because their basic morals always had been this, and though they were swayed temporarily because of the situation, it still was hard for them to swallow the idea that anyone would be left allowed.
That's what's really tough about the audience participation in this play, because they'll feel an equal pull, and it's hard for us to Creon's point of view as well. I was saying during the break to someone that the attitude toward the polis among the Greeks is quite different from our own. We think of the city as an entity outside ourselves, don't we? But the Greek did not. The Greek thought of the city as a kind of nurturer. The city was not some objective thing outside the self. It was the sum total of the selves, and it nurtured the social, moral, political good of the people. So their connection to the city is much more intimate than our modern one, and I think we have to try to keep that in mind. So the poor audience sees, geez, Creon's right here, and geez, Antigone's right here, and wouldn't it be nice if we could all be, yes, exactly, you know? But what the Greek audience would figure out real fast is something is wrong when we are forced with that kind of choice. Something's gone very wrong. We shouldn't be in this position. Something's gone wrong.
I don't think we are that different than they are.
That's right.
Because,
Really? Yeah. Okay.
because our cities are our lives. They're our place of employment, our place of living, and all the rest of it.
Yes.
And the choice, and I think we are like them. In the beginning, if our government holds up a choice, we'll go for that, most people, because there's a lot of stability. We need that. Of course they're right. You know, we can't all just run off by ourselves. But Antigone does see to the heart of it, because our governments are for our benefit. We are not for theirs. And I think it's enormously important that we keep that in mind. And that, I think, is what got lost sight of here, that Antigone ended up calling the attention to.
And yet, at a time of revolution, one would think that restoring social order would probably be at the top of any leader's scale of values.
But he did it, and I mean, order was restored without that. And I did have a question about that. There was a line later on that made me think that it wasn't just her brother who wasn't allowed to be buried. They were beginning to say every woman, every family person who's ever lost a loved one in a battle and knows, or maybe that was it, some never are buried.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been it.
Mm-hmm.
And they know the torture. They began to think about that.
Yes, yeah.
And to relate to her pain and to see that it mattered.
That's right. Let me ask a simple question. Everybody, yes, I can see you hunkering down now. Whose tragedy is it?
I think it's
What could be a simpler question? Who's the tragic hero?
I think it's Creon.
You do?
Yes.
Why?
Because he conforms to our concept of a tragic personality. He's illustrious at the beginning, and he doesn't make the choices from evil or spite. He makes these choices in favor of the city for what he thinks is for the good of every person in the city, and yet they lead ultimately to his downfall politically, and then just as importantly to the loss of his wife and his son, especially his son. And he feels that he has a hand in that. because had he not entombed Antigone, the son would never have done that.
Absolutely true. Yep. He does
So
come
really,
to that
he
awareness.
has totally destroyed himself.
Yes, he has.
He hasn't really lost his political base, at least at the end of the play. He's still the king,
That is
right?
correct. That is correct.
But his
Yep.
reputation is severely damaged.
Yes, and he's a very different king. And
Yes.
I think the question that you'll want to ask is he a better king
I think
at
he
the
has
end of the play? And I think most of you will say he is.
Yes.
He has a bit of hubris that Oedipus doesn't. He says, "I now possess a throne and its powers," and then he takes on the city as his, not just the throne, but he goes a little beyond, and he makes a statement that a man's true colors are shown when he rules people. Then you know what
That's
sort
correct.
of man he is.
That is correct. That's exactly what he says. And what you find in this Creon is a certain intransigence and a certain unwillingness to listen, and a certain, I guess you'd almost call it tyrannical nature that he must be purged of. Can I get other points of view on this, on who the tragic hero is?
Well, I think that the play wouldn't be as universal as it is if there weren't black and white in each character. And I was trying to see some of this in Antigone. And though she is doing the correct thing and the right thing, because in death everyone should be equal, which I took from the book,
right.
From the play, she's willful. We were discussing some of this. Granted, Ismene was trying to talk her reasoning powers to Antigone, but there was a point where Ismene wanted to join her, and I got the feeling that Antigone said, "No, I want to do this all by myself."
She did say that. She did say that. She said you had your opportunity and you didn't take it.
I want the fame, I want the power, I want the honor.
That's troublesome about Antigone, isn't it? Sophocles uses many techniques to distance you from Antigone, if you'll think about it. How many times does she talk about her betrothed during the course of the play? Once.
Yeah, not much.
Once during the course of the play. How about how she treats her sister? The example you're using. Doesn't that serve to distance you from her? And what about her her wanting to be caught? I mean, she fulfills the dictates of religious burial the first time when she strews dust on the corpse, right? What's she doing coming back the second time? You got it. That's the word that's always used with Antigone, is the word you just used, is that notion of the martyr. She wants to be a martyr for the cause, doesn't she?
And the only martyr.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she undercuts her actions by saying if she had been the mother of children and other factors, she never would have done it. Anyway.
That's precisely right. Yeah, she seems to be doing it for principles that are rather abstract, aren't they? Yeah, that also causes a certain distance, I think, between the audience and Antigone. Yet there is, again, your black and white, I think, is nicely done, because I think you're right. I think neither Creon nor Antigone is wholly right or wholly wrong, and that's what makes this play so very interesting, why we always come back to it. It is not a melodrama at all. In melodrama, it's the stuff of TV. You got good guys and bad guys. It's real simple, you know, but not this one. Find the good guy and bad guy in this one. It's real hard. Although the play ultimately does come down, would you agree, on the side of the conservative religious view. The play ultimately sides with Antigone and posits that Antigone's point of view is the correct one. Let me go to Chad, because I've been ignoring this side.
When you mentioned that Antigone was doing all these things to isolate herself away from her sister and her family, that only served to make me empathize with Antigone even more, because I think the reason why she was pushing her sister away, aside from the fact that her sister didn't want to initially go into it in the first place, was it, I think, made that burden easier on everybody. If she died the martyr, she would die knowing that, okay, well, if I pushed everybody who I care about that's closest to me away, it makes me it makes it easier for me to go through this sacrifice.
That's a good point, Chet. That's a really good point. And so she's doing something noble in doing that, and sparing her sister's life. Yeah, that's a good read of the play. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
that's one reason why I thought initially the only tragic hero was Antigone. But then with Creon, I remember there was a scene when Creon first found out somebody sprinkled dust all over the body, and he starts questioning that sentry.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought it was really ironic because the attitude he took toward that sentry was like, "Oh, you're the one that did it. You're responsible."
That's right.
It was the same attitude that Oedipus took against Creon when Creon was warning him, was saying, "Oh, I'm not planning any conspiracy against you. What are you talking about?" Oedipus was like, "Oh no, yes, you
quickly reaching a conclusion."
Right,
yes,
right away.
Yeah,
and so,
good point.
If Antigone was so concerned about how her actions were going to affect other people, how did she think this was going to affect the son of Creon? Haman, her fiance.
She didn't seem to.
No.
Think about him a lot.
Yeah, she didn't, did she? Yeah.
But you don't have one scene between Haman and Antigone. Not one.
That's right.
And you don't, I thought what happens at the end. When I was rereading the play, I thought, I missed that relationship.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And it's not just her responsibility.
That's right, and it's not just you. All audiences have. He's doing that for some reason. He's stressing the Haman-Creon relationship much more strongly than he's stressing the Haman-Antigone relationship, although Haman's love for Antigone is quite clear, perhaps even more so than Antigone's love for Haman.
For all we know, Antigone was given by her, those were arranged marriages. It isn't like our current love affair,
True.
I'm going to do it or anything.
Yeah, true.
But I think in carrying over from Oedipus to this, and having read Colonus also, the martyrdom came from the minute she decided to stay with her father and not lead a normal life.
Really, yeah.
What she did in this play was assumed from the start, because her closeness, her loyalty to her father, her brother, her whole family is much more important to her than her own life.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
I didn't see anything that came as a surprise.
Yeah. Let's go to the monitors. I interviewed a former Illinois State Supreme Court Justice, Seymour Simon, in his law offices about Antigone. We asked him to read Antigone, which he did, bless his soul, and gave us an hour of his time, and I wouldn't want to guess what the billing on that would be. And let's take a look at what Judge Simon had to say about who the tragic hero is in Antigone. I think you'll find it instructive, and then we can talk about it some more as we come out of it. Do you have any sympathy with Creon in this play, or do you feel that his policies simply are unjust?
Well, I have some sympathy with him. After all, Antigone's brother, the person who was killed on the battlefield, was a rebel, a traitor, and I can see that the government, that a nation has the right to perpetuate itself and to oppose rebellion and treason. On the other hand, if Antigone felt strongly enough about the moral and religious need to have her brother buried, I can see why she did it, but then you suffer the consequences.
Do you see in this play less a conflict of right and wrong than a conflict of two rights?
It is really a conflict of two rights, although Antigone thought that she was opposing a wrong.
Right.
But I can see some justification for Creon's position. And in these things often there is justification on the part of authority which is being opposed, but often that justification is not strong enough to withstand the objection. There's a greater moral right in the objection.
If we set the play in America today, wouldn't we find in favor of Creon rather than Antigone?
Well, it was not. I interpreted Antigone's position not only as a religious one, but as a moral one. Desire to bury someone rather than leave them unburied on the battlefield to be pecked away by birds and insects, and I can see a right in that. Except, again, you were dealing with someone who is a rebel, someone who is a traitor, and rebels don't always get treated with as much compassion as General Grant and President Lincoln treated the Confederacy at the end of the Civil War. You know, they're always told, take your horse and go back home.
Yeah. And you understand Creon's need to make of Polynices an object lesson.
Yes, because if he succumbed, that would weaken his own authority and perhaps his own ability to survive.
Yeah, we're in a very shady area of law here, aren't we? Because you're invoking moral law, and your morality may not be my morality.
That is very true. I mean, take the Civil War. That's the best example. That was a sharp clash. Of course, it was part economic, but it was a sharp clash in moral values, too. But there, you can prevail only if your moral position is so right that you attract a large following of people. If Antigone could have attracted all the followers of Creon to her position, and they threatened Creon with overthrow, he might have changed his mind.
Yeah. That's a good point, because she doesn't win over the chorus, does she, in the course of this play? She can't get those old men.
She's alone.
Yeah, she's very alone.
She is not a Rosa Parks.
I have a kind of a trick question, but I don't want you to think of it as a trick question. It's a rather simple question, but it doesn't admit of a simple answer. Whose tragedy is it? Is it Creon's tragedy or Antigone's tragedy?
It's Creon's tragedy. He's a very tragic figure. At the end, he's all mixed up. His son is against him. Everyone's against him, really. He's a lonely figure. I don't see the multitude, although the course wasn't in favor of Antigone. I don't see anyone lifting him up on their shoulders and carrying him off as a hero. And if there was an election, he probably would have lost the next election.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, he does strike to the heart of what's interesting in this play, which is the very strong political undercurrent in this play. He's right in pointing out that what Antigone needs to do in the course of this play, if she is to triumph, is to win consensus, because that's how we triumph in the polis. We don't triumph through strength like we did in the tribe. We triumph through consensus. And what is so stark about this play is the way that Sophocles isolates her. You should know that in most Greek plays that feature a heroine, the chorus is a chorus of women. In this play, the chorus is a chorus of old men, which further isolates Antigone. What she needs to do is to win those old men over to her point of view in a political sense. And of course, it really doesn't happen. She doesn't win them over. It's only at the very end of the play, after Tiresias has spoken to Creon, and then you get that rapid shift of everybody going over to her side, that you see that. She doesn't
know how to play her politics.
Yeah, well, you see, but let's make a serious point here. How is the young woman to play politics in the Greek polis?
I think she did as well as she could do. There just wasn't enough time.
Yeah.
And she shortened her own.
Yes, she did.
That was a choice she made.
Quite willingly.
Otherwise, she might have lived to see, and if she had still been alive when Haman came in, they might both have still been talking when the father showed up.
She made her choice. She was a martyr to the cause.
Perhaps she was a martyr because she wanted to teach Apollos that they're not always right. Maybe she was making this point. They were wrong with the father and they're wrong with her.
Isn't that the point?
And the lesson that they have to listen to her, and she was showing them that they're not always right. And I think that's a good lesson for them.
Sophocles makes the point for Antigone, if we can play with what, with what you just said. Yeah, that is the point. Yeah. The problem for us, of course, let me just make a point and I'll come back. The problem for us today, as we take this play and apply it to our society, we live in a society of multiple religions, and we get some really serious problems here. What happens when the law of the state conflicts with the law of religion? Which is to take precedence? That's why I said to Mr. Justice Simon, your morality, your religious law may not be my religious law. And here again, we have, how do we solve this in the polis? How do we solve this in the political, social arena? It's a very difficult problem.
But if we could see this on a even broader political basis, that is what happened with Achilles and the body of Hector, what happened with Creon and Antigone in the body of her brother, and what happened with the nation and post-Vietnam with the wall, unless you deal with the grief and the deeper issues of the losses, then you never deal with anything, and you're going to suffer for it.
But the problem, you see, the problem I have with that is that Polynices is a traitor to the state. We don't build a wall to traitors. We don't have a monument to Benedict Arnold,
But Achilles had to give up his revenge and vengeance and give up that body. And he had to agree to its burial, no matter how he felt about it personally.
Yes.
And that's what I mean. It has to be on a deeper level than person.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see your point. Yeah. Good point.
And that's what Creon needed to do too.
Yes.
And besides, burial is not necessarily just a monument. It comes out with Tiresias as the media mogul coming up and saying that there's a public health crisis here. When the birds are eating the exposed body, they're flying around and depositing pollution on the altars of the gods.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
And
there's a defilement here. Yeah.
To the land.
Yeah. And it's a defilement that's offensive not only to the city. I think it's the point you're making. It's offensive to the entire cosmos, as the play posits. Yes. Yes, the arena for this play is not simply the arena of the city, is it? It's the entire cosmos. Yeah. Chad, I promise to come back.
As far as applying this play to, I guess, the world today, I think the play is a classic example of two schools of legal law today. One, the natural law school, as embodied by Antigone, and the second one is the positivist school, or the rules of man. And you mentioned in the interview, you asked if this was not so much an issue of right against wrong, but two rights. Mm-hmm. And the natural law school and the positivist school are two major lines of legal thought today. And first thing I thought when I read this was, oh wow, this is a big old legal issue.
Yeah, I agree. When I had him in the interview, this is the problem with doing snippets, is you didn't hear what other things I asked him. And I asked him exactly that. Your having said that now wants me to go back to the raw footage and clip it in. I asked him about natural law, and he poo-pooed it. No such thing. No such thing as natural law, he said. Laws are man-made. No such thing as natural law. Very interesting. Yeah, it's spoken as a true lawyer, right?
He made a distinction between religion and morality.
Yeah, yes,
that's
indeed.
Kind of deep.
Yeah. Good, very good point. Yeah, what you are, in a sense, that's what those two represent, don't they? Creon and Antigone is two views of the primacy of law. Antigone being, as you suggest, the natural law, and Creon being...
But now our society seems to be going back to the natural law, because if someone commits murder, or say the Bobbitt case, they say, well, look at how she suffered, and now we take into consideration the abuse, and we get carried away with justified revenge. I mean, that's about it. With the boys, what was that case?
Menendez brothers, case, yes, oh my.
If they have a reason, well, then we have to reconsider now. We're vacillating, we don't carry through.
Well, there are a lot of people who are troubled by this, obviously, although this is not an issue in this play. Although it may be in the sense that we trouble ourselves a bit over Antigone's motives. If the motive is one of martyrdom rather than of religious, fulfilling religious duty, then that's a bit more troublesome. But yeah, a lot of people are complaining today that what we are doing is understanding act, and in understanding act we forgive act. Whereas in an earlier time there was act, and the act was judged, right or wrong, and there wasn't a lot of...
which is right.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Well.
Now we're becoming so embossed with that. We don't have enough prisons, and people are going back and forth. I mean, you'd think they'd make one decision and that would be it. And then,
you want a very simple world, I think. Right. Yeah.
Actually, the way I remember this, and you may correct me, please do, and that is Antigone was doing more than meets the eye, because actually Polynices, being the other older brother, should have had the throne. The younger brother tricked him, and that's the reason he was coming back to take. He wasn't rebelling. He was coming back to take his throne, which is another reason Creon didn't want to honor him.
Yeah, there are a lot of variants on that myth. I have to be careful, because there are like 8 different versions of the Eteocles-Polynices struggle. You do know that they were each to rule for a year. Eteocles for a year, then Polynices for a year, Eteocles for a year, Polynices for a year. Eteocles did not give up his throne at the end of the year, and Polynices then, to get what he felt was rightly his, went and got this foreign army, and there's where the problem is. He goes and gets this foreign army to invade Thebes, and therein is the rub.
But legally, he was right.
Perhaps. It's not an issue in the play, though.
Was the benefit,
here we go again.
Benefited by these multiple deaths, and that's one reason I felt that Antigone felt she had to emphasize what actually happened.
Yeah, yeah. It is another one of those cases of an antecedent action simply not being an issue in the play.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right.
To carry on Dr. Seymour's comparison with Civil War, nobody's mentioning her feelings for her brothers, and the fact that, that recently, or maybe even closer to our own time, here's a woman with 2 brothers on opposite sides of the fence.
Yeah.
She loves them both.
Yes, she does.
It doesn't matter to her what their politics were. They're her brothers.
That's correct. Her filial duty is such that it takes precedence over any kind of...
Doesn't that give you admiration? I have had such admiration for Antigone to have this tunnel vision with all these other reasons popping up, and yes, they're right, that's right too, and she still pursues that one tunnel vision act of just demanding her rights for her brother, and I think that's amazing that she doesn't back down.
I agree, yeah. Makes her certainly beyond the norm, yeah.
When the brother went and got a foreign army, it wasn't really foreign, was it? Because I thought he married one of the princesses of that city or whatever to...
But it is foreign in the sense that it's Argives attacking Thebes. It is another, it is another group attacking the native group. So in that sense, it is an invasion by foreigners. And the triumph, again, you got to keep in mind, if there's a play by Aeschylus called Seven Against Thebes, which is this story dramatized. I recommend it to you. But you must understand that if the Argives and Polynices triumph, it is going to be utter destruction and disaster for Thebes. And so that's why there is sympathy for Creon's position at the beginning of the play.
You asked the question in the interview of Justice Simon, in America today, wouldn't we come down on the side of Creon over the individual? Did you really feel that way?
Yeah, I really did. I mean, I think I can point out any number of examples of it. I'm of an age where I went through the Vietnam experience. You made reference to it before. And that was a very controversial war. And there were any number of strong individual conscience issues here that conflicted very strongly with the state. And it's quite clear, isn't it, in that conflict, who's got the power? Look what the state has at its disposal. Now, let me also add, to just so we'll see that it is very much like Antigone, What ultimately happened during that struggle between the extraordinary power of the state, which would jail me if I didn't go into the army, which could ruin me if I didn't do what it told me to do, even though it was against my individual conscience. What ultimately happened, what didn't happen for Antigone, or maybe happened at the end of the play, what ultimately happened was a kind of political shift. What happened was a groundswell, which over time decided that this thing really doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. As the body bags started coming home, as we were bombarded every evening on the news. Perhaps another example is the abortion issue. I can think of no issue in which ethics conflicts with morality, if you follow that distinction, than the abortion issue. Ethics from the Greek ethos, meaning the sentiment of the group, versus morality, which sees something higher than the consensus of the group, sees a higher calling. So you get a tremendous struggle in the streets right now between the civil law and the moral law, and they conflict very dramatically. And sometimes even violently. What is clear is that the individual conscience morality point of view is unable to win consensus, to win over the ethos. But there will be that struggle. We can point to a gazillion examples of these things. The real difficulty, what makes Antigone so extraordinary, of course, is that she's willing to go up against the power of the state. There are rare people who are willing to do that. Ismene is an average woman.
But if you
Antigone's
think of
not.
the Vietnam War protesters as the individual, I mean, they were not, well, maybe if they broke, physical laws or anything, but they were not jailed. They did win out at the end. It was a struggle.
That's what I said.
It was not power over might. And the same with the abortion issue. I mean, it's the right of the individual. I just feel that in the United States, we are giving credence to the individual. I don't know if we would come down on the side of Creon.
I don't know that we are. For one thing, we jail more of our own people than any other nation in the world, regardless of its level of civilization, or as we see it, or industrialization. We have more people in jail than anybody else, contrary to the popular view that nobody goes anymore. Also, on this abortion issue, I believe my daughter would say, and I tend to agree with her, there's no fruitful dialogue between basically two poles.
Oh yeah, there's no middle ground, is there?
No, they're both trying to shout each other down, although you have to know that there are women on both sides who see merit in the other argument. We are also the only nation that has the distinction of trying to play like it's not a real life in order to justify a pro-abortion rights stance. And so it's not decided yet. This is a struggle that's very much still going on. And the idea that it's not even a case that there was one life before and now there are two. There were two lives before. And now there are three real lives. I think the day we all accept that as the basic facts, it will change the nature of that discussion, and maybe we'll come closer to moral, legal, ethical.
Yeah, what's interesting in our society, as we apply it to our society, is that the consensus ultimately does win out, which is kind of fascinating. If you think of, and again, to win out against all of the power that the state can bring to bear against the individual is really quite remarkable. Our recent history, our recent civil rights history, is probably the most dramatic case. I hope you've all seen that 13-part series, Eyes on the Prize. It is some of the most compelling visual history you'll ever see, and it traces the civil rights struggle. A lot of people breaking law in the civil rights struggle, and the state brought its power to bear on those individuals. What they were able to do was to win a political consensus, but not easy, and over a considerable period of time. And of course, that struggle is not over. So we have, the modern analogs to this play are many.
I think the bottom line is that we have to watch what motivates us, and ultimately each one of us as individuals have the responsibility of defining our own consciousness, the need to know ourselves, and we have the responsibility of acting according to our consciousness, regardless of the consequences, civil or otherwise. Right or wrong, we are responsible.
That's what the play seems to be positing. Both of them, it's the motive. They're somewhat similar in their motivations, in that both of them are very self-willed. Both of them are very strong, but ultimately, I think the play comes down on the side of Antigone. We all agree on that. That ultimately, the audience sides with Antigone, and that's where the consensus is built. The consensus is built not inside the play, if you will. The consensus is built inside the theater. You see, you hear my point. You know, it's the audience that wins over, and that's I think, the didactic nature of that. But even having said that, boy, does that open the door for all sorts of trouble in the state. It really does. It opens the door to all sorts of trouble. And this is our dilemma, isn't it? This is the political dilemma we face as a democracy.
Well, we try to separate church and state. I think our government is trying to be extremely careful not to step on the rights of religion, even to there were a couple of months ago, there was an issue on the sacrifice of animals.
Yes, down in Florida, I remember
and the religion won out.
Yeah.
That you can sacrifice animals, that the government would be stepping on religion in this instance.
Yeah.
So I think we try very hard for individual rights.
We do, but of course our government is founded on religious principles, so it's a tricky business. You know, it's a tricky business. It's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. This dilemma that is dramatized by this play is a dilemma we continue to wrestle with in rather dramatic terms.
Think of the results that she chose, Antigone knowing that she would be stoned to death. Now you could see if she was going to be stood up to a wall and shot, it would be over. But can you imagine how terrible the thought of one stone after another breaking her body, and she's suffering this pain and never getting away, as that people take it out on her as a scapegoat?
Yeah.
You know, that's a major decision.
Well, you see, I think we don't have a lot of time left, but a consensus seemed to have formed in this room that Creon is the tragic hero, huh? Mm-hmm. So let me muddy the waters a bit, and I'll look at the Oedipus play as a model, and I'll say that what tragedy does is celebrates the hero for pushing back the envelope, as we say today, for being willing to go to the limits of our humanity. And so I'll suggest to you that Creon's lot is sad, to be sure, but Antigone's is tragic. Antigone's celebrates, as we saw the dignity of Oedipus, as we saw Oedipus enlarge the sense of our humanity. A man who at the end of the play is not crushed by his fate, but is somehow ennobled by his fate. Perhaps we can say the same thing about Antigone, who, unlike us, who would be Ismenes in this play, she was willing to push to the limits of humanity. And the play then celebrates her. And perhaps we ought to turn that Aristotelian notion of tragedy around and think about tragedy as something that celebrates the tragic hero for those qualities, those virtues and flaws which are absolutely inseparable in the tragic hero's character, but which allows the tragic hero to show us what is possible for the human being to do and to experience. I really want to suggest to you that old notion of the tragic arc, my students and my undergraduate students are always come in from high school knowing about the tragic arc, that the hero's fortunes rise, and then there's that turning point, that peripeteia, as Aristotle would say, and then they crash. And I think they miss that they come back up at the end. Not all the way up, to be sure, but the tragic arc to me is more like that.
Well, and that's why it's hard to see Antigone's up. But even in the course of the discussion, I've come to feel a little differently about her suicide, in the sense that she was already entombed. As far as she knew her life, again, here's how it looks. There was no escape, and she was already a dead woman.
Yes,
she
she
did was
gets what she wants in the
what
course
she
of the
did,
play.
well, I don't know that she wanted to die, but she did cheat them of being the ones who did it. And in that sense,
Yes.
her suicide did that. It said, you can't,
Yes.
you won't kill me, you won't.
Yes, the old Socratic kind of suicide.
That's right.
Yes, right.
There are so many aspects of love, too. The filial love,
Yes.
the love for the country,
Yes.
love for Antigone
Yes.
and Haman,
Yes.
and Creon's
love for the
his
gods.
son.
Yes, absolutely.
Through all history, starting with Genesis, there's always been a prophet. To me, she's a prophet. There's always like a voice crying in the desert to man going on with his usual life, and then this
Yes.
one person.
And what does the group do to that?
They kill
Destroy
her,
it.
destroy
Exactly.
and
You always try to destroy
Jeremiah,
it.
John the Baptist, all the way down the line. They've been warned by these wonderful people that rise up like a phoenix, to just rise up from the ashes and try to tell humanity what's right, because they're going off track a little bit, and yet they won't listen. And then finally they destroy that thing. They don't want to hear it. And,
sure.
And all the
the human
prophets
way.
are killed.
Chad?
I think it was. I think she's remarkable, especially taking into consideration that she was a woman
Yes.
way back in those times.
Absolutely.
Yet she had the strength of her convictions to carry her through, and she carried herself all the way through. And I guess as Susan mentioned, the only thing they could do to her is kill her.
Which was no big deal to her.
It was no big deal to her, and she took that away from them.
That's right.
By killing herself.
That's
so
correct.
she sort of said,
That's
"Ha!
absolutely right.
I stuck to my guns,
Yeah.
and I took away the only thing you could have ever done to me."
Sure. And look whose conviction is stronger. Let's again go back to how many times Creon says, woman's not going to say, woman, the man-woman stuff. And look who wins.
Because a lifetime of living with that probably was an important factor in Eurydice's ending her own life.
Yeah,
When she
yeah.
hears the news of her son.
Talk about cheap drama tricks. One thing you don't do in drama is introduce a character at the end of the play, have them die, and think the audience is going to give a damn. Who is this character? But it works, doesn't it, in this play, because of the way he piles it up. Because you get Antigone, Haman, Eurydice, and it's like.
We have to pay attention to the title Sophocles chose.
Yes,
Antigone,
I
and
know.
not Creon.
Yes, indeed, I know. But be careful of that, because that's like reading Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and mistaking Julius Caesar for the tragic hero in the play. That can sometimes be misleading. The usual argument for that, I'm glad you brought it up, the usual argument is the audience would simply know Antigone better from the House of Thebes mythoi.
Usually the hero doesn't care if they die, like Oedipus, they have this one thought, this one belief, and they don't care if they die or live or put their eyes out or what, they're going to carry on, and that's it.
It's interesting, I pointed out to you that I think we were off camera when I did it, that the Greeks in Athens would empty the prisons and make their prisoners go to the plays, to watch the plays, in an attempt to rehabilitate the prisoners. And if you'll think of Oedipus and Antigone in those terms, it's really quite fascinating, isn't it? What they are teaching the prisoner, what it is to be a human being, to find that conflict not only between life as you think you know it and life as it is, but also those eternal struggles between your inner voice and the voice that compels you. And that's the struggle in Antigone. We're out of time again. I don't know how this happens. Thanks again for your attention, and we'll see you next time.